Senator Cassidy.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously, the position that you'll be holding would be a policy decision, at least a policy advisory position. And Mr. Biggs, I'm sorry I was out for a bit of it, so you may have already discussed this. But we all know that there is a looming insolvency of the trust fund. At that point, under current law, benefits will be cut by 24% across the board. You'll be in a position of policy. You've criticized other proposals, so I presume, and you've mentioned in your writings in the past, which you've mentioned you've had, that you got to cut benefits, at least as you approach it. You got to cut benefits or raise taxes. Which of those would you recommend?
The Social Security Advisory Board, to my knowledge, has never made recommendations.
But if you had to, I think that's important, because the whole point here is we want people with expertise. We want people with expertise who actually can weigh in and perhaps echo a good proposal or poo-poo a bad.
Okay, I just want to be extremely clear here, though, that in the role as a member of the Social Security Advisory Board, these are not the sorts of questions the advisory board would ever
Oh, I thought they
address.
discussed policy. Am I wrong?
If you look back at what the advisory board...
But I'm just going to take it straightforward that they discussed policy. So would you cut benefits or would you raise taxes? If you had to, if you were the czar for the day, what would you do?
What I've argued for is gradually, over time, transitioning to a benefit structure that is more focused on maintaining and protecting against poverty in old age for the lowest income retirees and reducing the growth, which relative to current law benefits does mean, cutting benefits, particularly at the high end and for a more limited degree at the middle.
Now, of course, the issue is that, as we know, is that Social Security cannot tell the difference between the ICU nurse who's been working at the tax max from the billionaire. It just cannot. And so the ICU nurse who's worked for 20 years at the tax max may wonder why her benefits are being reduced. We imagine, as President Biden does all the time, that it's only those making over $400,000 a year. But really, at inflation adjusted, it's $160,000 a year. So would you reduce the benefits for that person making $160,000 a year? Is that whom you, knowing that's how Social Security defines it, is that how you also define it?
Sure. If somebody who earns the tax max, which is currently about $168,000 for their full career, would retire with a benefit somewhere north of $45,000 per year. For a couple, that comes to $90,000 a year in Social Security benefits. I think that is more than that's something like 4 times the elderly poverty threshold. I think that is more
so
than is necessary.
If that couple lives in San Francisco, for example, they would say that $90,000 doesn't take them very far in San Francisco.
Sure.
But I gather from your benefit, because you're very critical of mine, which is trying to avoid that. But that assumes that there is an alternative. But I guess under your plan, the couple making $90,000 in a high-cost area would just have to move.
Well, Social Security does not distinguish between costs of living between different parts of the country. And that's, for better or worse, that is the design of the program. But my own point of view is that Social Security is intended principally as a social insurance program to protect against poverty in old age. I do think paying a couple a benefit of over 4 times the elderly poverty threshold before they've touched a penny of their own savings is probably more
But the
than is
elderly
necessary.
poverty ratio is pretty low. I mean, if you look at what poverty is, the poverty threshold is low. And so I don't know if we can look at that poverty threshold and say, oh my gosh, if you're doing better than that, you're doing pretty well. I'm just struck because it's easy to get out there and throw stones at people, but then when you get to the kind of brass tacks, where do people live and how are they going to live? It's a lot harder. And you're going to be in that role. It won't be,
Okay, I do want to be very clear. The Social Security Advisory Board does not look at these sorts of questions.
Oh, I thought it said policy.
It does
Am I
not.
wrong on that?
It does not look at those sorts of questions you raised.
I saw that it was all kind of policy. It included policy, that when Monahan came up with it, I'm seeing some heads nodding in the back, that it was supposed to be doing policy.
Board makes recommendations with respect to the program, but they don't make formal policy. So
They don't make the policy, but
Correct.
they make recommendations.
that's correct.
Right.
Yes, they make recommendations,
Yeah, and that's where I was going with that.
right.
Because really, we got to come up with a way to do this. Now, just to put a point on it, obviously, I've spoken about my big idea, which you called a capital gains tax. I'm a little bit curious about that. If the goal is that we want to hold harmless those who are less well off, and there's a marginal decline in rate of return theoretically for those because of our big idea, which I won't elaborate, but would love to otherwise, and I've spoken to different members of this committee and they know about it, that would disproportionately affect, to the degree that that marginal effect would occur, those who are better off. But it will leave that nurse who's at the tax max for 20 years basically unscathed, except insofar as she's in a 401k or something. And I say that not expecting your comment, because you've made these comments in the past. But I think it's important for the position that people advising on policy to move beyond the facile answer that sounds so great when you disassociate it from someone's life and you try and connect it with where someone lives. Ivory towers are easy places to reside. And politics is tough because we do run into these people and we do have to accommodate for them. And I say that for any of you, as you are advising on policy, move beyond the theoretical and the comfort of a sinecure, no offense, into where someone lives who otherwise has nothing else to live on. With that, I yield.